Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4 for 4 Football for our Week 7 preview show. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, joined today by the man coming off a high on Tom Petty radio on Sirius XM. It is none other than John Paulsen. Paulsen, everyone knows your top 5 songs now. We didn't spoil it last week.
Yeah, I hope everybody had a chance to tune in. I think it might still be up for another few days, but it was a lot of fun to do. And then, of course, the Packers keep losing. But the Warriors won last night, and Liverpool beat Man City this weekend. So not a bad weekend of sports, all things considered.
Tough life for Paulsen, revolving around Packers, Tom Petty, and the Warriors. Sam, 2 weeks off of a marathon now. How are you feeling? Sam Hoppen, of course, Director of Analytics here at 4 for 4 Football.
I am doing great. Went for a run yesterday, and the legs are feeling much better, but it's getting chilly here in Chicago. We officially are past our 2 weeks of fall and are already into winter, it seems like.
I think my worst take, Paulsen doesn't have an opinion on this because he doesn't get ceilings, or he doesn't get seasons in California. But I think my worst take is that fall is my favorite season, Sam. Not only that, but I think summer is my least favorite. I kind of hate how every day is the same. Every day is completely sunny. Every day is warm. That sounds great. I know. That sounds great. Wonderful. I know. But I need some change in my life. So I prefer hoodies. I prefer 30 to 50 degrees. And I prefer, as you noticed whenever you went running, because I went for a long run Saturday around the Morton Arboretum.
Yeah.
And that's where the leaves right now are tricolors, 4 different colors all around. So no, this is my favorite season. Screw summer.
I mean, I don't disagree that fall is a great season. We have football. You've got a lot of sports going on. The weather is perfect for being outside, but we get about 11 or 12 sunny days in Chicago, most of which happen over the summer. So I try to take full advantage of those.
Well, the people did not come here for global warming talk. They are here to preview Week 7 fantasy football. And Paulsen, I think that begins with what happened on national television on Monday night, because Latavius Murray completed his takeover. Melvin Gordon did not record a single touch in the final 3 quarters as Murray, active for his first game with the Broncos, led the team with 15 carries. And this is a player that didn't record a touch either until the second drive. So with Mike Boone active last week, with Melvin Gordon obviously active last week, you would think there's still meat on the bone here for Latavius Murray moving forward. Discuss how you view Latavius Murray rest of season, and also about Melvin Gordon, because I think people have some questions now about what to do with Gordon as well for the rest of the season.
Well, John, first off, props to you for calling this Latavius Murray. I don't think even you thought that this takeover would happen this quickly in this backfield. I thought maybe there would need to be another fumble from Melvin Gordon or two, or some poor play. But it was really strange to me that, for the last couple of years, Melvin Gordon was deemed good enough to siphon carries away from Javonte Williams, and then now can't carry the load or even be the lead back in this backfield. Very strange situation, especially with him not really communicating with the coaching staff at halftime or finding out why this was happening to him. However, the bottom line is right now it appears that Latavius Murray is the RB1 in this backfield. He's going to see the most carries. That's how I have them projected. Boone played a lot. I don't know that he's that good of a pass blocker, but ran a lot of routes and was in a lot of passing downs. I don't know that is how long that's going to stay either. But, moving forward, I think Murray has the lead. He is, I think, 32 years old. So, tough to trust him to stay healthy for the remainder of the season, with 15 to 20 touches per game. But in the short term, and there's a lot of folks like us out there where we need a spot start this week, and Latavius Murray is a pretty strong one.
And that's the whole point for me, Sam, is that we don't need to overblow Latavius Murray's ceiling now, but we get what I assume will be a weekly 20-touch running back who is a RB3 probably in this offense, RB2 ceiling, but that's okay. Like, that's viable. We talked about this with Brandon Ayuk last week, where yes, the ceiling and what he had performed to this point of the year was frustrating. But then you get these weeks where you plug him in for that 4 for 50, and we have evidence of his ceiling historically, and he delivers like Ayuk did with 2 touchdowns last week. That's what Latavius Murray reminds me of. Is just someone we need to plug in because running backs landscape right now is absolutely brutal. What are you doing in these deeper leagues, 10-man benches, high-stakes leagues with Melvin Gordon?
I think you have to hold on to him right now. Obviously, there have been some trade rumors, people assuming he might get traded given his lack of work in the last 3 quarters, like you mentioned. So off the top of my head, I can't really think of many situations that he might get a better opportunity in. But if a team is trading for him, that certainly indicates that they're probably going to want to use him. And the writing has been on the wall for the Broncos the last couple of weeks, them not really wanting to use Gordon because he's been fumbling the ball quite a bit. So I think you hold on to him right now. He is a bit of a roster clogger at this point. Seems like the third guy behind Latavius, who is the primary rusher, and Mike Boone, who looks to be the primary pass catching back, despite Paulsen pointing out that he's not a great pass blocker. So he obviously not starting him with any confidence or at all, but I think still holds some value for the rest of the season.
And he reminds me of DJ Moore's situation. DJ Moore, of course, the wide receiver, 65 in fantasy points per game right now, hasn't topped 60 receiving yards in any contest. He also reminds me of Cam Akers in that in these deeper leagues, I don't want to drop them because of their trade value. Like if DJ Moore, after Kansas City restructured Travis Kelce's contract, if DJ Moore suddenly ends up in Kansas City, like imagine dropping that kind of player. So I'm definitely holding on to these fringe guys on their own rosters who we know could easily land in better offensive situations. And then we'll reevaluate from there. Maybe we still drop DJ Moore in the end, but right now I definitely don't want to get rid of them even in shallower leagues. I also want to talk about DJ Moore's former teammate, Robbie Anderson Paulsen, because now we have Anderson landing not only for a quick turnaround on Thursday night in what may be his first game. We don't know if he'll be active with only 4 days to prepare with the team's playbook, but more importantly, a situation that we know he will likely play in place of or around Marquise Brown's injury. Marquise Brown, who is now projected to be out for the next 4 to 6 weeks. And I think we should still hold on to Marquise Brown wherever that's applicable. Hopefully you have an IR spot to do so, especially if you're a 6-0 top-heavy team who may need that bench asset to come off and start or flex in the fantasy playoffs. But discuss Robbie Anderson's situation a tad in this offense around Rondale Moore, DeAndre Hopkins, who's returning on Thursday, and AJ Green.
Yeah, I think that this probably affects AJ Green more than anyone there. You're going to see 3 receiver sets of Hopkins, Rondale Moore, and Robbie Anderson in the short term, at least until Marquise Brown comes back, and then Brown probably will replace Robbie Anderson. It sort of depends on who's playing better between Rondale Moore and Robbie Anderson at that time. We know Anderson's fast. He hasn't been very good lately, but this Carolina passing game has been pretty brutal over the last few years. He's had his moments. But I think this was probably, Marquise Brown's injury is probably prompting this, but they were just staring down the fact that they were going to have to keep playing AJ Green a lot of snaps, and they don't want to do that. Hopkins, I think, comes back to a pretty sizable role. I think I was, a little bit worried about his role with Marquise Brown healthy and getting 10 plus targets per game. Hopkins is a target hog as well, but he, was a significantly different player last year, averaging 57 yards receiving compared to 88 yards the year before. And now he's in his age 30 season, supposedly in great shape. Might take him a game or 2 to get going, but I think he'll probably get back to the 8 to 10 target range. Robbie Anderson is not a big target guy. He'll probably be used as a situational downfield threat, maybe be in that 5 to 7 target range. They have been trying to feed Rondale Moore as well. So it's getting a little bit crowded, especially with Zach Ertz there at tight end.
And I would argue that Rondale Moore is still the much safer wide receiver, has the higher weekly floor than Anderson, if only because everyone keeps pinning Anderson in this ceiling position for the Cardinals, who have been terrible, first of all. But also, like, Kyler Murray this year has been bad throwing downfield. 8 of 30 on throws, 20-plus yards downfield, 33rd in completion rate in that area. Also a league low, 7.7 yards per attempt on throws, 10-plus yards downfield. So, like, where we are pinning these targets and the ceiling production for Anderson, that's where Murray's been terrible this year. So I think there are just a lot of questions to answer, Sam, and that's why I would much rather be higher on Rondale Moore personally.
Yeah, over the last 4 weeks, Rondale Moore has about a 22% target share, which is exceptional. And the top 3 guys for the Cardinals, Marquise Brown, Zach Ertz, and Moore over that span, have combined for about a 74% target share. So with the Marquise Brown injury, I would sort of expect Hopkins to jump into that large workload. And then with only about 25% of the targets left between Robbie Anderson and maybe Greg Dortch or some of the running backs as well, to your point, I don't think that's really much of an upgrade for Robbie Anderson this point. So if you can potentially sell high on that, I don't know if people are going to buy into it, but I do agree that Moore has the safer floor than Robbie Anderson going forward.
Let's also discuss Wan'Dale Robinson, Paulsen, because we saw him active for his first game since week 1, the season opener, of course, when he started in 2 wide sets prior to injury, and he spikes 4 targets and a touchdown on just 15 snaps as a limited player in his first game back. That was actually the first touchdown by a Giants wide receiver since week 1 as well. Wan'Dale, we expect his role to increase moving forward, but how do you view him rest of season? Because I think that's what everyone is asking is, how much does this role increase actually? And what is the production that we should assume ensues?
Yeah, I think he had a good preseason. He kind of got nicked up prior to the year and then has been out really since week 2. He played a little bit in week 1. 23 snaps or 23% snap share, 15 snaps. He got 3 catches, 37 yards, touchdown on 4 targets. So when he was out on the field, he was targeted on 4 of his 15 snaps, which is a really good level of usage. And you just look at this Giants receiving core and how bad they are in terms of just being down players. I mean, Kenny Golladay hasn't materialized at all. They finally removed Darius Slayton from the doghouse because they need him desperately. Kadarius Toney can't get healthy. Sterling Shepard's done for the year. So they're just desperate for pass catchers. And it looks like he has the most potential, I would say, of anybody that's semi-healthy right now. If you can get Toney back out there, maybe they would have some dangerous weapons at receiver. But right now they're just, utilizing Bellinger, the tight end. They're trying to throw to Saquon Barkley as much as possible, but they're just trying to move the ball piecemeal, doing it by smoke and mirrors. But if Wan'Dale can get healthy and get his snap share up to 50, 60%, then he could be a useful fantasy starter.
Sam, Wan'Dale Robinson or George Pickens rest of season?
That's easily George Pickens for me. I like the way he's progressing despite the mix up at quarterback that Pittsburgh has had. He's had a really solid target share. I think Wan'Dale Robinson, to John's point, like, they are certainly lacking at, playmaker outside of Saquon Barkley. Benjamin Solak of The Ringer wrote an article today about the Giants' success and had a bunch of stats on some of the wonky personnel formations that they've had, running out zero receivers, multiple tight ends, multiple running backs. And I think that's what they're doing to compensate for the lack of receiver. But if Daigle does revert back to, again, trusting the wide receivers and playing these guys, I think Wan'Dale is probably, I would say, the highest ranked wide receiver for me on the Giants rest of season, but I'd still rather have Pickens going forward.
Ben Solak, who of course will be joining us on the Move the Line podcast Thursday night at 6:45 p.m. Eastern. Tune in live. Paulsen, let's start with you for the Packers running backs, because after A.J. Dillon's usage had been trending down in both targets, 2 weeks ago, remember, a season low target share, 0 targets, and overall share of backfield touches. We saw A.J. Dillon out-touch Aaron Jones in this game. And I'm curious if maybe it was because of the forecast and heavy rain during this game. Film gurus have also said it was for Aaron Jones' lack of pass pro in this one. But overall, what are your thoughts on this backfield moving forward? Because I think it is a situation where if you want to, you could probably get Aaron Jones for lower than what it would have costed 2-3 weeks ago.
Yeah, I think this is a situation where, heading into the season, we thought that the Packers offense might take a step back, but that the usage for Aaron Jones specifically would increase enough to offset the downgrade in the overall offense. But they're just not scoring as many touchdowns. They're not in the red zone as much, and he's not getting as many of those opportunities. They also have this weird tendency to take him off the field on every key 3rd and 4th down, which I don't understand. He's their most dynamic player, certainly the best receiver out of the backfield, but they always have A.J. Dillon in there. Maybe that's for pass protection, but they should really think about having both players out on the field if that's the case, because they're taking their best offensive player off of the field. So I think, you're looking at this team moving forward. The Washington Commanders are 7th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs, and they have the Bills that are 8th. It might be a couple of rough weeks here before they get to face the Lions, who are 32nd. And then it's just a bunch of, top, 10, 12, 11. Those are the matchups right now until we get into the back half of the season and get to face the Bears prior to the bye. So, for this team to be good, they need Aaron Jones to do more and to score more touchdowns and just to do better in general. But they have these weird games where they go away from him and they're not getting him out as much as possible. But it's also a function of what's going on with the offense. If they can't sustain drives, then they can't get both these players on the field enough, and then one of them tends to suffer. And last week it was Jones.
And the frustrating part, Sam, is that those in-game decisions don't help us when trying to make decisions before the game. So it's really tough to pick when we actually could flex A.J. Dillon for value. Is there anything else in the usage you've seen between these two running backs that makes you higher or lower on one or the other moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, Paulsen pointed out the using both of them on the field at the same time, and that was the discourse around the Packers heading into this season because of the lack of receiving talent that they had. Put Dillon in at running back and split Jones out wide. The Packers have had both Dillon and Jones on the field at the same time, just 12.5% of their plays, which is 11th in the league, but still not quite as high as you would expect. Connor in our Slack earlier this week asked if Aaron Jones was a buy, sell, or a hold, and I think I didn't respond because it's such a tough question. I think I would buy on Aaron Jones right now, but it's the same conversation that we had about the Cowboys backfield last week, is that both of these guys are immensely talented and deserve more work than they're getting, but they're going to continue to eat into each other's workload. So I still lean Jones over Dillon. Rest of season, I think Jones is a little bit more elusive and has a somewhat better pass catching profile. So if you have one of them, you're still probably starting them, given where you may have drafted them or what your running back position looks like. But I'm more bullish on Aaron Jones, I think.
And I could add that the Packers generally, I mean, this is a well-coached team. We've had these situations in the past where they've looked really bad and they figured it out. They've got 3 straight 13-win seasons. I think Matt LaFleur has that. So, you expect this thing to turn around, but it's taking longer than what we would have thought. I mean, they kind of struggled start of the year offensively, and then these 2 losses to the Giants and the Jets, and just really no offensive punch. It's a little bit surprising. And then now the defense is playing pretty spotty, and the offensive line can't protect Aaron Rodgers. So there's just a lot going on. And I would expect the rest of the season to be better than what it has been, because I think there's, it's a good coaching staff, but it's just kind of dire straits right now. And I think that does present an opportunity for talent. I Aaron Jones over AJ Dillon is a no-brainer rest of the season, but you're just, with Aaron Jones, it's kind of been like this. You're going to have these weird weeks where he doesn't see enough touches.
And Sammy Watkins practicing in a limited capacity on Wednesday. I will say, though, the one player I do trust is Allen Lazard, who now the last 3 games has averaged 8.3 targets and a 21% target share for 13 fantasy points per game. At least he's not only on the field running the most routes out of everyone, but he's also seeing the opportunity as well. So continue starting him in your leagues. Like Aaron Rodgers being frustrated for fantasy, Paulsen, Russell Wilson has also been an absolute disaster. The Broncos offense has scored over 16 points in only 1 game all year. And Russell Wilson has more starts right now, 6 than passing touchdowns, 5 through the air. The quarterbacks available on most waiver wires, Matt Ryan, Jimmy Garoppolo in an amazing spot for volume, at least this week. They're still out there, and we can still start them over Russell Wilson. So where do you stand right now, given that Wilson suffered that injury in the second half of Monday night? He could miss this week, even though he's pushing to play. Of course, in that game, he also throws for 15 yards in the second half. Help lament everyone's anger right now.
Yeah, I think it's a question of, are you cutting Russell Wilson now to stream the position? Because that's an option. In certain leagues, you kind of have to, because the benches are so small. You can't hold 2 quarterbacks. It's usually not a good idea. Or are you just benching Wilson and hoping that in a few games they can turn it around, and then you stream the position in the meantime? That's probably what I would lean towards if I could use a spot for Wilson and not cut him at this point, due to the nature of the quarterback position this year. He does have upside, but it's been really pretty dire again this year. If you're watching him play, they have a couple of moments here and there, but just nothing consistent. And now he has a hamstring injury that will, in theory, limit his ability to run, which is one of the things that makes him a somewhat dangerous fantasy start for you. So, yes, I think this week we have to see what he does, but you could certainly start a Daniel Jones against Jacksonville, Tua coming back, Trevor Lawrence potentially out there, Dak Prescott coming back. Jimmy Garoppolo, you mentioned, against KC is a really nice matchup there, 29th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. And I'd even consider like a Ryan Tannehill, even though they're a pretty low volume offense, he tends to play pretty well against the Colts, and they're at home, and he's always a threat for a rushing touchdown. So if we're looking at a hobbled Wilson with a bad shoulder, I think you really have to look elsewhere.
And that's the issue, Sam, is that with NFL scoring overall down, it's clearly affected quarterbacks right now. Josh Allen, the QB1, averaging 29 fantasy points per game, is literally averaging over 10 points more fantasy points per game than the QB8, a mid QB1, and Geno Smith averaging 18.5. So when everyone says this person's struggling, what do I do? The answer is, well, the entire league is struggling. So unless you have Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, or Lamar Jackson, not even Patrick Mahomes really has performed weekly. There really is no correct answer. That's why it's hard to say, oh, Jimmy Garoppolo rest of season, oh, Matt Ryan rest of season, because there really isn't a rest of season. I think it comes down to, like Paulsen said, are you streaming for Russell Wilson? And in my opinion, you are streaming for Russell Wilson. And if possible, just battling it out on waivers every single week for that position.
Yeah, for sure. Russell Wilson's no longer a must-start person at the position. He has just a 2.5% touchdown rate this season, negative 3.3% completion over expectation. The Broncos are also leaning a little bit more run heavy recently. They have a negative pass rate over expectation in 3 of their last 4 games, because the defense has been good enough that they don't really have to throw. They're not down by a ton in many of these games in situations where Russ has to drop back so many times. It was encouraging to see him scrambling a bit in the game on Monday night, but again, with the hamstring injury, there's no guarantee that even continues. So at this point, you're probably just, I think, playing the waiver game, like you said, and are better off doing that than sticking to just one quarterback.
Justin Fields also, if he's out there. I don't think his 80-plus rushing yards from last week is sustainable, since that was his first time over 60 rushing yards all year, but increased 23 pass attempts per game the past 3 games compared to 17 in his first 3. The report out of Chicago, Paulsen, is that the Bears are now going to ride, quote unquote, the hot hand in their backfield. Khalil Herbert, of course, in 4 games with Montgomery this year, had averaged 6.5 touches per game, whereas he was the workhorse without Montgomery. So this does open a door for Herbert to deliver standalone value whenever Montgomery's available. The issue is that, again, hot hand doesn't tell us anything when making decisions before the game. So what are you doing with Montgomery and Herbert, and how do you view them rest of season?
Yeah, if they're announcing that they're going to go hot hand, you probably need to rank these players closer than what I typically would. I mean, Montgomery has been a volume-driven RB1, RB2 for his career, and if Herbert is outplaying him in a particular game and now is going to see more touches, that just makes Montgomery all that more risky of a start. So you think you have to move Montgomery down and then start using Herbert as a regular flex. He's kind of gone from a attrition hold to where, he's going to get 5 carries a game. And then if Montgomery gets hurt, he goes off, to now he's kind of in a Tony Pollard situation where they may give him 10, 12, 15 touches in a game if things go really well. So these 2 players have to be ranked a lot closer now.
Sam, does this give you confidence to blindly start Herbert for our RB2 flex spots over the bye weeks, since there's at least a chance now he could emerge weekly?
During the bye weeks, for sure. I mean, we're going to be missing a lot of key players here over the next couple of weeks. I hope that their hot hand approach is just them sort of signaling, hey, we're going to include Herbert a lot more, because he has had the hot hand all season. He's been much more efficient on a rushing yards over expectation per carry standpoint, and has just looked better than David Montgomery. The one part of this offense that Herbert really hasn't had a chance to capture is the receiving work. David Montgomery has still been running a route on over 60% of the team's dropbacks in the game that he's played fully healthy. Herbert has only gotten up to 56% and 48% in the 2 games that Montgomery missed. And I'm counting week 3 as a game that Montgomery missed, but has not been above 25% in either of those other games. So if the passing work for the Bears starts to tick up just a little bit, I think they continue to use Montgomery in that role and rely on Herbert more as the rushing guy. So to answer your question, I do think that Herbert is worth RB2 or flex consideration right now, because he's been so efficient. He's broken off some really long runs, but it's unlikely that he hits the full ceiling that he had in the couple weeks without Montgomery, that while Montgomery is still healthy.
We knew at some point there was going to be a blip on the radar, and that's what happened for the Seahawks. Geno Smith, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, everyone from the top down, against a Cardinals defense that quietly, since they got healthy in week 2, has not allowed a quarterback to reach 260 yards after getting blown out in week 1 by the Chiefs. But overall, Paulsen, just a blip on the radar here, nothing to worry about. Are we still moving forward with Tyler Lockett, who is currently ranked as your wide receiver 13, and DK Metcalf, who's 1 spot ahead of him, as your wide receiver 12?
I would say blip on the radar, but something to monitor. I mean, I think generally speaking, we're not expecting Geno Smith to keep this up given his career numbers, but maybe he does. Maybe he is able to have sort of a late career renaissance with the Seahawks. The Cardinals are coming in now at number 2 in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers, so it was a bad matchup, but those numbers are helped by what they did against the Seahawks last week. So this week will be probably a more true test. I mean, you got an indoor game against the Chargers. They're 24th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. I would expect the Seahawks receivers to get going. I think they're both must starts, given the bye weeks and what they've done so far this season.
Sam, unless you have thoughts on Seattle's receivers, I actually want to move on and ask you about Mike Williams, because people have a choice to make. They can actually choose to part with Mike Williams, even though his last game against Patrick Surtain did not go well. But Keenan Allen supposedly will practice in full this week, has a great chance to return in the Chargers' next game. And remember, Mike Williams, an 11.5% target share in week 1 whenever Allen was last available. What are your thoughts on the Chargers receivers and Mike Williams' value?
I mean, I think for all those reasons, it makes him the perfect buy candidate right now. I mean, the Chargers were very clearly avoiding targeting Williams while he was being covered by Surtain on Monday night. With the positive reports of Keenan Allen coming back, that too will depress Williams' values going forward. But this is all without Keenan Allen, but has had double-digit targets in 3 of his last 5 games. He's one of just 19 wide receivers averaging over 8 targets per game, is still going to have a very high routes per dropback rate going forward. So you look at week 1 and yes, that was not great with Keenan Allen, but I think that was more of an exception than the rule going forward. And, again, there's no telling if Keenan Allen will be able to stay healthy throughout the rest of the season. So I think right now is going to be the lowest that Mike Williams' value is going to be. So if you're in need of some wide receiver help, especially through these bye weeks, that Williams is a perfect guy to be targeting.
Let's assume Keenan Allen practices in full, Paulsen. Where would you have him ranked on Sunday?
If he goes full, then you start to get him closer to, where he typically is, which is that, low end wide receiver 1, mid-range wide receiver 2. I feel like in this first game back, it's kind of a wait and see. He's probably going to be in lineups because of the bye weeks and people are in dire straits. I mean, I looked at one of my rosters today and half the team's on bye, and if I had Keenan, I'd be happy to have Keenan Allen to start if he were coming back from an injury. But as far as Mike Williams is concerned, it was a 1-game sample. Looking at last year, he had a 21% target share, 8.1 targets, 4.8 receptions per game, 72 receiving yards, 0.56 receiving touchdowns last year. And that was with Keenan Allen pretty much playing a full season. So not too worried about it. It's just, I think Mike Williams is one of these guys that has, prior to last year, not put everything together in 1 year. I think he had a big yardage year one season, had a big touchdown year in another season, but last year was the first time that he really put everything together. And, can we completely count on that rest of season? I don't know. We have basically a season sample of him doing that. We're just not exactly sure if he's going to continue. I would have him ranked as a wide receiver 2, low end wide receiver 2, maybe not as dependable with Allen back, but he hasn't been that dependable with Allen out. So I think in this situation, you're looking at Keenan as probably pretty close in targets. Keenan with 8 to 10 targets per game, and then Williams checking in with 7 to 8 per game.
Whether he returns this week or not, I think people have questions about Rashad Bateman, who John Harbaugh did say he's quote unquote getting closer to coming back. And the issue, of course, is that Rashad Bateman, prior to injury, had not reached an 80% route rate in any game as a limited player and was averaging 6 targets per game for an offense that funnels targets to 2 players, but Mark Andrews being, of course, ahead in Rashad Bateman in target share. So what do you think about Rashad Bateman for the rest of the season? Because I think some people in shallower leagues, Paulsen, have decisions to make because they could drop him for another player that may get dropped. Marquise Brown, for instance, a Jameson Williams, players like that.
I think he's a hold. I think he's a talented player. Yes, there are concerns. He's not playing 80, 90% of the snaps. It's been 66, 61, 62, and then he had his injury game of 44. But even in those limited snaps, he cleared 59 yards in all 3 of the first 3 games. He is going to have the occasional clunker because he seems to be mostly a deep threat right now, when really he has the ability to run routes all over the field. But I think the reason that he's a stronghold for me is you look at his upcoming schedule in our hot spots, and he does not have a matchup inside the top 18 until week 13 against Denver. He's got Cleveland, Tampa, the Saints, Carolina, Jacksonville, then Denver, which is a tough matchup, and then 4 more green matchups against Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Atlanta, and Pittsburgh again. Just a lot of very generous pass defenses, and really just a lot better than what he has seen thus far. I mean, the Jets, Miami, New England, and Buffalo were his first 4 matchups, and they were all inside the top 16 adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. So I think there's good days ahead for Rashad Bateman.
Let's discuss Washington's wide receivers, Sam, because Jahan Dotson may be out there on waiver wires or may be stashed since he's expected to return soon. But more importantly, a quarterback change since Carson Wentz is now expected to be out the next 4 to 6 weeks, and Washington is going back to Taylor Heineke. Maybe this actually dampens your argument, so apologies if it does so. But I do want everyone to calm down on Terry McLaurin, because I think they look and see his 25% target share from last year from Heineke. But also remember, he was the wide receiver 25 in fantasy points per game, and he saw the fewest catchable targets from Heineke of any receiver with at least 130 targets. Like, that's why he struggled to ever hit a ceiling. So with Curtis Samuel and Jahan Dotson now around him, logically soaking up this target share, it's not really giving me a reason to be more excited about Terry McLaurin. I'm actually more worried. What are your thoughts on Washington's receivers overall?
I would agree. Again, last year was also, I think you mentioned, was without essentially Curtis Samuel for the majority of the season. Adam Humphries was getting about 4 targets per game when Heineke was the starter. So would expect some of that to go to both Dotson and Samuel. But Carson Wentz hadn't been playing terribly. I mean, relative to some expectations. So I think for me, this is sort of a stay away. Like, I'm not buying, but I'm not selling either. I just sort of rather hold on each of these pieces and see what happens with them. The Commanders have been leaning a little bit more pass heavy this year, which was a little bit shocking. But I do think that using last year's stats, to your point, is a little bit of a red herring and not necessarily what you want to lean on. So I do think that I don't think that this is the end all be all for these pass catchers, but I really don't think it really changes the status quo that much going forward.
How do you feel about Washington's receivers, Paulsen, since Curtis Samuel has still led this team in targets in every single game this year?
You know, the quarterback change can bring good. It can bring bad. I was hopeful for DJ Moore with PJ Tucker coming in and having a nice yards per attempt in his history with DJ Moore. And then that turned into a 3-catch, 7-yard debacle against the Rams. So you just don't know until it happens. But, you know, you look at Heineke's numbers last year, 6.9 yards per attempt and a 4% touchdown rate. Wentz has been playing 6.4 yards per attempt and a 4.3% touchdown rate. So it really doesn't look like, maybe Heineke's a little more efficient with his yardage, and maybe Wentz is a little bit better at throwing touchdowns, but it really looked too close to call. So we're probably getting a wash here. And it just sort of depends on who Heineke feels like he has the best rapport with. I would think that would be McLaurin, since he's played, you know, the most with him. But we just have to wait and see. Dotson coming back does complicate things for Curtis Samuel, because he's starting to see a little bit of a downswing. They're not using him as a rusher. Hasn't been quite as effective the last few weeks. And now you have Dotson coming back and eating up some targets. I'm also keeping an eye on Logan Thomas's status, because if he's back, then you know, you've got 4 or 5, maybe 6 targets going to the tight end.
How do you view Dotson rest of season? Because I think people, again, will have an option to pick him up on shallow waiver wires. And he was dependent on touchdowns. He converted all 3 of his end zone targets into 3 scores previously as the 3rd wide receiver in targets on this team. Do you think his target share grows, maybe even ahead of McLaurin's, though, with Heineke for however long he is starting? Another question I personally have, since the Commanders are fourth in their division, 2-4, 2 games behind third place, and Hal, a 5th round pick, will definitely get starts. Like, it's just a matter of when he'll get those starts.
Yeah, I mean, I have Dotson ranked 51 rest of the season, around Josh Reynolds, Michael Gallup, George Pickens, Elijah Moore. So, but this ranking was completed before we knew that he was back at practice today. So he might bump up a little bit, knowing that he might play this week. But I have him ranked probably as a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 right now, and Samuel a little bit higher than that, and McLaurin as maybe a high-end wide receiver 3. It's just this passing game isn't that great, and we don't have a quarterback that can support all these pass catchers. So I think you're going to end up with some spotty starts from all these guys. They're all talented enough to have good games. Just a matter of who is going to be in each given week.
And Logan Thomas, for what it's worth, DMP on Wednesday. It's time for everyone's favorite part of the show, who joins us at 1 p.m. Eastern every Wednesday, and that is Hoppen's Charts. And Sam, you want to destroy that excitement and start with the Texans running backs. Go ahead.
I don't know why you want to say, I'm saying destroy that excitement. I'm super excited about Dameon Pierce going forward. They just had the bye week, so nothing to point to from week 7, but was just looking at a couple things before the show that stood out to me. And Dameon Pierce has a stranglehold on this backfield right now. Over the last 4 weeks, he is 7th in high value touches per game. He's one of just 8 running backs with at least 70% of the team's carries. And more shockingly, he is starting to run more and more routes as well. Over the last, the 2 weeks before the bye, Rex Burkhead was down to 38.5 and 36% routes run, when he hadn't been below 45% in each of the first 3 weeks. Meanwhile, Pierce has been up to 48.7% and 52% in those games. So Pierce with a commanding 75% snap share in week 5. I think this is a situation where if you have Pierce, you're holding him. He's past the bye, so you don't really need to worry about filling in for him anymore. And you, I think, have the guy that many people drafted going in for the rest of the season.
Any pause on this backfield, Paulsen, since the Texans haven't lost by 10 points in any game since week 2, since Dameon Pierce did take over this backfield. So I do wonder if they're down by 3-4 scores, if Rex Burkhead would come in. But any pause overall as Dameon Pierce as a low-end RB1, let's say?
No, they're treating him as a bell cow. And anytime you have a bell cow, it really doesn't matter how efficient, even though he's been pretty efficient, it really doesn't matter how efficient. You want the player on your team because they are going to produce fantasy points for you, even if it's inefficiently. So Pierce has exceeded my expectations. I think I was a little worried about Burkhead at the start because there were multiple beat writers saying that the fantasy community just doesn't appreciate how much this team loves Rex Burkhead, but they obviously have transferred that love to Dameon Pierce and are treating him as a bell cow. I would also like to point out from this chart, Josh Jacobs, Devin Singletary, dead zone running backs who have emerged from the dead zone and are doing very well, relatively speaking. I mean, Josh Jacobs is a top 10 running back. Devin Singletary's been okay. He's not getting a lot of touchdowns, but he's getting a lot of high value target touches. And then Ramondre Stevenson obviously benefiting from that Damian Harris injury over the last couple of weeks to really turn into a bell cow in the short term.
That's something I'll definitely take into account next year, because we should really just be playing the game of fantasy football when drafting. And the game entailed when Josh Jacobs dipped 2 or 3 rounds, just holding your nose and making that pick since it was a value.
And Miles Sanders as well. He's right there next to Aaron Jones.
I like Miles Sanders. I wasn't agreeing with everyone on that. But Josh Jacobs, I definitely got wrong. I was behind on that, and I'm paying the price for it. So just play the overall game of fantasy football is really the theme. Sam, another chart you have for everyone here is the question everyone once answered, and it is how to decipher the Jets wide receivers every single week, which right now I assume is just a lottery ticket. Just if you're starting them, good luck. Maybe one of them will succeed. What are your thoughts? What are they telling you behind the scenes?
Yeah, I mean, if you should have said dampening the mood with this, because the Jets wide receivers have been abysmal in the last 3 weeks with Zach Wilson under center. Over the last 3 weeks, again, in those games, the Jets have a negative 7.3% pass rate over expectation, which isn't exactly screaming like we trust our quarterback. And I think, you know, if you're struggling to figure out what to do with these guys, I think Elijah Moore can be dropped again. Like in these big bench, high stakes leagues, you're not going to, because there really aren't many better options. But, guys like Wan'Dale Robinson, like we mentioned before, George Pickens, like I'd rather have those guys over him for the rest of the season. He's still running a route on 87% of routes, on dropbacks. So there is some hope, but he's just gotten 8 targets in the last 3 weeks. Garrett Wilson hasn't really been much better. He's gotten 15 total targets in those 3 games, but has only caught 6 of them. Corey Davis currently looks like the quote-unquote wide receiver 1 in that offense. He's averaging about 55 receiving yards per game, but that's not any production you want to lean on going forward. So none of them, in my opinion, are startable right now, but I'd rather hold Garrett Wilson moving forward than Elijah Moore.
And how do you parse through this situation for weekly production redraft leagues, Paulsen? Because we've also seen since week 4, since Zach Wilson returned, he's averaging 25 pass attempts per game. They've become a run-heavy over expectation team, which is wise for them, honestly, to hide Wilson instead. And at least previously, we could rely on Elijah Moore being out there for a team high on routes run. That's what we hung our hats on. But the past 2 games, Corey Davis has run more routes than Elijah Moore as a team's number 1 receiver. So what are your thoughts about this situation?
Well, the Jets are the Breece Hall show now. Like,
Yep.
You just can't trust any of these pass catchers. I think heading into the season, we kind of thought that it would be 1A, 1B with Moore and perhaps Garrett Wilson if he lived up to his draft capital. But when you have Corey Davis sticking around and just really, outplaying them or out targeting them at least, then there's just not enough to go around when they're only attempting 25 passes, and a lot of them are going to the running backs, especially Breece Hall. So, as Sam mentioned, I don't think that any of them are trustworthy. I would feel most comfortable starting Davis or Wilson right now if I was in a pinch, because of just Elijah Moore's role has completely dried up, and it's a little crazy. I mean, I think we saw at the end of last year that he and Zach Wilson had a couple of good games together, and we were, kind of hanging our hat on that, like hoping that would transfer over, but it just, it hasn't. And, he's probably better off with Joe Flacco out there attempting 40, 45 passes per game.
For reference, Corey Davis, the wide receiver 42 in your week 7 rankings, Garrett Wilson, the wide receiver 45, and Elijah Moore, the wide receiver 59. T. Higgins also returned to the lineup, Sam, and was out there for the second most routes on the team, even though he looked a little bit hampered still. A couple boneheaded drops and mistakes as well in that game as he continued to get healthier. Any takeaways from Jamar Chase's blow-up spot and T. Higgins returning to the lineup?
Yeah, I think it's wheels up for all of the Bengals wide receivers moving forward after starting the season with a negative 2% pass rate over expectation in the first 2 weeks. Cincinnati's had an 8.7% pass rate over expectation since week 3, which is the 4th highest in the league in that span. As you can see on this chart, the Bengals wide receivers have a combined 67% target share, which is the 8th highest total in the league. All 3 of these wide receivers are pretty much running a route on over 90% of the team's dropbacks when they're healthy. So I think each week, all 3 of these guys are startable. If again, you want to invest in some wide receivers, these guys, I think, are the ones to do it. Obviously, Tyler Boyd, the third option here, but still can have some solid games, I think, with how much they're passing the ball. So I'm really excited about the direction that this Bengals offense is going.
Let's talk about tight ends, because there are a lot on the waiver wire And I want to start with Robert Tonyan, who I know you're excited to tell everyone about, Paulsen, as the Packers' essentially second wide receiver.
Yeah, he's starting to come on a little bit. Maybe that knee's feeling a little better, but he had the 10 catches last week. His role is expanding a little bit. I think Rodgers trusts him. And I think he's tight end 8 over the last 3 or 4 weeks as well, fantasy wise. So I think in the wasteland that is tight end, he's somebody you can start. Knows he has the confidence of his quarterback. Has a history of catching touchdowns. He does look at him. We get across the 30 or 40 yard line. He does look at him down the seam for that seam touchdown. And he's also they do a pretty good job of scheming him some touches as well, or some targets. So it's just, if you don't have one of the top guys at the position, you're just trying to find players who can perform for you in a given week or in maybe a 3 or 4 week span, and perhaps they graduate to top 8, top 5 status. And he has a history of that and now seems to be getting fully healthy. So I'm hoping that his snap share rises a little bit. They still use DeGuara and Mercedes Lewis and the other guy, I forgot his name, second year, Tyler Davis, a little too much for comfort. But I think if Tonyan keeps playing as well as he did last week, that his snap rate will rise a little bit as well.
Mercedes Lewis, the Keith Richards of tight ends. Sam, any notes behind the scenes on Robert Tonyan's usage, who I actually think is the pivot from Randall Cobb's injury?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to mention. It looks like Cobb's going to miss several weeks right now. And over the last 4 weeks, Tonyan has averaged 6.2 targets per game. He had 12 this past week, which is boosting that a little, but he's run a route on 63% of the team's dropbacks and has a 0.24 targets per route run rate, which is 6th among tight ends with at least 15 targets. So again, it's tough to want to invest much into this Packers offense the way that they've looked in games recently. But again, at the tight end position, you're really just scraping at the bottom of the barrel if you don't have one of Kelsey or Andrews. So I think Robert Tonyan for the next couple weeks at least is a guy that you should have some confidence plugging in, especially while Randall Cobb is out.
Let's get into lightning round and clear some things up for week 7 early in the week as best as we can before we get out of here. Paulsen, any notes on Seattle's tight ends, perhaps one of them emerging after Noah Fant tied DK Metcalf for a team high in target share this past week?
Yeah, I made a bad dad joke that something's brewing in Seattle in our
terrible dad joke.
Yeah, terrible. Sneaky starts article. But with Fant, like, it seems like they're figuring out that he's actually a pretty good athlete and a pretty good tight end. Over the last couple of weeks, he's run a route on 60% of Geno Smith's dropbacks. For most of the season, that number has been like hovering around 50%. But that extra playing time has led to 12 targets in the last 2 weeks. He had a touchdown 3 weeks ago as well, a short one. And we know, again, like Tonyan, we know he is a tight end 1 caliber player. He has delivered tight end 1 numbers in Denver over the last low end tight end 1 numbers over the last couple seasons. And, we were sort of excited about his role expanding in Seattle, but it's been Will Dissly catching the touchdowns. But, as I mentioned, his playing time is increasing a little bit. So if you're in dire straits at the position, like I am in a couple leagues, Fant's a worthy addition, a worthy streamer this week against the Chargers.
Let's keep it going, Sam, because again, lots of tight ends out there available for everyone. I even checked in the high stakes leagues we play, and I saw Mike Gesicki out there dropped, and rightfully so, by a handful of teams. But what we saw was Gesicki actually emerge in this game that Jalen Waddle got injured in with a season high in route participation, 75%, target share, 12.7%, and 2 end zone targets that he converted into touchdowns. Do you think this sticks as a player we can start this week for bye weeks? Since, remember, we saw Gesicki play 62% of snaps, have 4 catches for a touchdown in week 2, but then literally the following week got a season low in snaps. Do you think it holds this time around?
I don't think it holds unless Jalen Waddle is out. It sounds like he should be fine as well. I just, again, no more than 4 targets in the game before this week. So no. It's a lightning round. No.
I would just add that Durham Smythe's injury opened up a lot of this playing time last week for Gesicki. He had 45 routes. Smythe was out 3 weeks ago. If you look at the game against Cincinnati, Gesicki had 24 routes. Smythe had 16. So I think when he's out, there's more and more playing time for Gesicki. The next guy I think had 6. The next tight end had 6 routes last week compared to Gesicki's 45. So he's more of an every down guy when Smythe's out. So keep an eye on Smythe's injury status this week. And if he's out, then he's a lot more confident, or Gesicki's a lot more confident of a streamer.
Okay, Durham Smythe is out in this hypothetical world. Would you start Mike Gesicki, Robert Tonyan, or Greg Dulcich?
I have Tonyan at 12, assuming I'm right now assuming that Smythe's out. I have Gesicki at 14, and then Dulcich is going to have to earn my trust. He's down at 22.
I completely agree. I think everyone got a little too excited for Dulcich. I am the fantasy realist of the industry where I try to calm everyone down because I guess I just ruin everyone's optimism. But like a 10.7% target share and long touchdown on broken coverage in a bad offense is not something I want to be like overly excited about, even in running a route on 81% of his dropbacks in his first game back. So, Sam, what are your thoughts on Greg Dulcich? And what about for you? Let's give you a different one for everyone. Greg Dulcich, Gesicki if Smythe is out, or Cade Otton, assuming Cam Braid is out.
Yeah, I was going to mention Cade Otton. You've got him written here in the notes, and I'd probably I almost might take Otton over Tonyan as well. So I'm for sure taking him over Dulcich and Gesicki. The Buccaneers inexplicably did not pass the ball that much against the Steelers this past week. But in week 5, when Cam Braid was out, Otton had 7 targets, looked like a fixture in that offense. Now, the Bucs wide receiver core does look like it is getting healthier, but I would expect the Buccaneers to return to being more pass happy in the weeks going forward. So I really like Otton and think that he's someone who could fit in for a couple of weeks.
Otton, an elite 86% route participation in that week 5 game as well. And Paulsen. Let's say the Latavius Murrays of the world, the plug-in RB3s are not available to you anymore because you read 4for4's week 4 waiver wire column. I think the Ravens backfield may have some relief here. What are your thoughts on the Ravens backfield for week 7 and moving forward?
I have one more tight end for you, Juwan Johnson,
Sure.
with
Adam
Troutman out with an ankle injury likely this Thursday. So Juwan Johnson should play a lot of snaps against the Cardinals, who are 31st in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight end. So that's a punt play there for you at tight end.
And in deeper leagues, let's just keep racking them up because, again, it's the week of tight ends, that won't deliver in the end. Daniel Bellinger had never run a route on 61% of the Giants' dropbacks in any game this year. He was at 82% this past week. Also a team high share of targets.
And they do look at him in the red zone too. Like he ran the ball and scored a touchdown as well. But you asked about Baltimore. So this is a tough waiver wire bid situation because there are desperate owners out there or desperate managers out there who have a need at running back. And, Kenyon Drake looks appealing after his big game. I read up on Dobbins. They said that it was the turf in New York that his knee didn't respond well to, and that it tightened up on him. And that's why he didn't play in the second half. And I don't know if that means there's a setback or if it just wasn't comfortable for him to run on the turf or the hard turf there. And he might just be back out there as the RB1 this week. You also have Gus Edwards working his way back. I believe he's in the 3rd week of his 21-day practice window and is apparently looking good. Very productive player. Everybody kind of forgets about Gus Edwards, but very productive player, 5.0 yards per carry type guy in that offense. He might be an interesting stash if he's out there on the waiver wire because if Dobbins continues to have setbacks, or if this is something that is there's smoke and there's fire type situation, Edwards could find himself in a lead role once he's fully back if Dobbins can't go. In this short week, though, Drake does look like a flex, but this could totally backfire, and he might be back to 5 touches behind Dobbins in a 15-touch role.
And it's worth noting Edwards' 21-day window isn't up until Monday, I believe, Monday or Tuesday. And so they don't have to have him active for this game. And it's, of course, not only a team total for the Ravens, an overall total in this matchup increasing, but also it's the Browns' run defense. Like, this is a team that has allowed multiple touchdowns to opposing running backs in every game since week 2. Like, we want the running back playing the Browns each and every week. And Kenyon Drake may be the sole proprietor of Dobbins' injury in this matchup. So I do think, actually, long-term, if they're on waiver wires, and both of them are, Deion Jackson as a contingency player makes clearly much more sense than Kenyon Drake. But if you're going for just a 1-week option, I think Drake is a better pickup than Deion Jackson.
Yeah, because you don't know what Jonathan Taylor's standpoint at your status is. You think that he's going to be back. If he's back, you're not looking at Deion Jackson as anything more than like a 5-touch type player. And I think the other issue with Baltimore is that Justice Hill might be back, and Hill's been playing some snaps when he's been healthy as well. So I'm very interested to see what kind of settles out with this. That's for that reason I wouldn't spend too much on Drake, but some managers are in such a pinch that you need somebody that might get 10 touches, and he looked pretty good in his last stint.
And of course, Nyheim Hines also expected to practice.
Yeah, he should play.
Did have the, as we expected, mandatory 1-week absent following a concussion now, expected to be back this week. Sam, what else do you have for everyone coming out at 4-for-4 this week?
Same as always. Hopping to two conclusions came out this morning. Positional breakout model comes out tomorrow morning, and plenty of more charts on the Twitter feed.
Paulsen, what else at 4for4.com this week?
I got to finish up Sneaky Starts. Got the podcast on Friday. Got the chat for 4for4 subscribers in the Discord. If you're not a part of that, then you need to be a part of that. If you're a 4for4 subscriber and not on our Discord, you're missing out on a lot of information. I post my Thinking Inside the Box series there of analytics and different little stats that are actionable every Monday and Tuesday. So get on that Discord if you're a subscriber.
The waiver wire is on the site. And if you do want to be in the Discord to read Paulsen's usage notes and jump into waivers Q&A, get some player props, everything else we offer there, since you made it to this point of the podcast, I bet if you DM me, we could get you 25% off. I bet. Don't hold me to it, but I think we could do that. So until then, we will, of course, be back. Paulsen will be back later this week for his sneaky starts and more usage notes to close out the week. Until then, be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you then.